Today I'm going to share with you 5 tips covering about 80% of all the photography basics that will allow you to instantly create great photos and also videos. These are tips I wish I knew when I started my digital photography journey about 20 years ago. By the way, with a 6-megapixel camera, the Samsung GX1L. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you one advice that would have changed everything for me if I knew about it at the time. Tip number 1 is easily one of the most overlooked things in photography because we all got used that our camera decides for us what's going to be in focus and what isn't. Most of the time it works in our favor because the modern cameras have a really good autofocus system where you partially even can select your subject. For example, insects, humans, trains, whatever your heart desires. The problem starts when there are multiple subjects of the same kind. Then your camera would make a decision for you, and that is not always in your favor. Look at this picture. It was really not my intention to get the guy in focus who jumped into the background. If you have multiple similar subjects, or if you really want to be in control what's in focus, then you should narrow your focus area, and if you have, even select the flexible spot. And then while you're focusing, you can half press the shutter button, and that would activate a focus hold. And now you can recomposition your image and then press the shutter button to take the picture. Also, I would suggest to use the focus mode AFC, that means continuous autofocus, and as soon as your subject would move or you would move a little bit, it would track and lock the focus in place. Now that you're in control of the focus, you can guide the viewer's attention to where you want it to be. But that all means nothing if you don't implement tip number 2. So now that our focus is spot on, some of our pictures are still not sharp. And it's really not a lack of focus, it's also not the fault of our lens that is maybe not sharp enough. So what is it? During the time that you're exposing the sensor, the shutter stays open so the light can fall through. Now we can have a little shake or a little movement, and that is registered on our sensor as a motion and as motion blur. So what can we do to reduce motion blur? It's very simple, and it really depends on what focal length you're currently using, what kind of lens you have attached. Let's imagine a light beam falling onto our sensor. The more focal length we have, the more telephoto we have, the further away this light beam goes. And every little motion here turns into a huge movement over there. So that means that when we have a longer focal length, we need to have a faster shutter speed. There's an easy formula to calculate that, and that is focal length times 2. Here I have a 50mm lens. Times 2 would give me 100. If I take pictures now at 1/100th of a second, then I don't have to worry about motion blur anymore. Of course, this formula is without taking image stabilization coming from your camera or your lens into account. Now keep in mind, if you have an APS-C camera, there is a crop factor that you have to multiply the focal length with. For Canon users, it's times 1.6. For anything else, it's times 1.5. So if this lens was attached onto a Sony APS-C camera, I would have to calculate 50mm times 1.5. That would give me 75. Then times 2, now we would be at 150. And so my safe shutter speed would be 1/150th of a second. Even with the perfect focus and sharpness, most photographers get the next step completely wrong. And this is tip number 3. Depending on what you want to photograph, you would choose your lens, you would choose your focal length, and you would choose the aperture accordingly. If you want to take pictures, portrait photos for example, you would choose the aperture f1.4 or f1.8, and that would give you a nice shallow depth of field, a nice blurry out of focus background. If you're into street photography, you would choose f4 to f8 because this would give us a deeper depth of field and it would render more things in focus, so you would get more things sharp. And if you're into real estate or landscape photography, you would use f8 to f16 because this would make pretty much everything in the picture sharp and in focus. When we're changing the aperture, that means we're changing how much light gets through the lens onto our sensor. The higher the f-stop, the aperture number, the smaller the opening is. The smaller the opening, the longer the shutter speed, because we need to leave the shutter open for a longer period of time so that enough light can fall through onto the sensor for a correct exposure. Since choosing the right aperture is crucial for your type of photography and is in direct correlation to the shutter speed, I would advise you to set the dial from your camera here to A, to aperture priority. What that means is you would choose your f-stop, your aperture in your camera body, and then the camera would calculate for you how long the shutter needs to stay open until the sensor is correctly exposed. Don't worry, you're in control and you can still change everything. For an even better control, I would advise you to put the histogram here on the display of your camera. But we'll talk about this feature in a completely different video. For now, all you need to know is setting the camera to A, aperture priority, will get you the majority of your photos perfectly exposed. My next tip is easily the most misunderstood feature on the camera. Now that we found the perfect balance between the right aperture and the perfect shutter speed, now that we nailed the focus, some images still don't look great. Let's take a closer look to the shadows in this image. Do you see all the noise or the artifacts and grains? Is there anything that we could have done to get a more clean, clear-looking image? Yes, there is. And that brings me to tip number 4. Even in low light, we should maintain a relatively fast shutter speed for handheld photos, otherwise our images would be shaky or blurry. We can accomplish this by raising the ISO. When we're changing the ISO, we're changing how sensitive the camera sensor is to light. The problem is, when we're raising the ISO, we're automatically introducing more noise and more grain to our image. Let's take a look. Here we have two identical pictures. One was taken with ISO 100, the other one taken with ISO 1600. The shadows of the image with the low ISO look so much clearer and cleaner, right? The good news is especially the newer cameras have a much better processing, and even higher ISO pictures are not as grainy as they used to be in older camera bodies. As long as our settings allow for a shutter speed that is fast enough to give us steady and sharp images at an f-stop of your choice, an aperture of your choice. You should always choose the lowest possible ISO. This way you have the most clarity in your images. Tip number 5 has probably the biggest aha effect, because it's something that most people don't even notice until it's pointed out. But once they know, they go, OMG. I've seen pictures like this with people on the beach, and the water is on one side up here and on the other side down there. And the water is literally flowing out on one side of the image. Most people don't notice that. Now, I don't want to tell you about composition, or I don't want to tell you that you have to follow the mainstream with a level horizon and with its 1/3 rule. I think you should take your photos at the angle of your choice as long as it makes you happy. But sometimes a leveled horizon makes a lot of sense, especially when it comes to photos on the beach or other images. And in this case, it would be so easy to achieve this when you put a grid on your display or the leveling tool, so that you have always control on how you're holding your camera. And here's my bonus tip. This is something I learned pretty late in the game, and because of that, a lot of my images are completely messed up forever. Start shooting in RAW. That makes a huge difference, because a RAW file is something that contains all the information the camera captured at the time while you took the photo. And then you can edit it, apply all the changes in post-production, and create an image of your choice. But the good thing is, even years later, after your taste changed and you want something different, you can simply reset it back to its original condition, and you can start all over again without losing a detail in your image. Here are two pictures. I apply some editing on the RAW file as well as on the JPEG, and then I want to try to revert it. On the RAW file, not a problem at all. On the JPEG, it's impossible, because whatever we do in post-processing with the JPEG is branded into this picture for good. I didn't know at the time, and I messed up a lot of my images, not only by selecting the wrong size and saving them in the wrong size. Also here, for example, this one, I changed it to black and white, because at the time I thought that's great. Now, not only is this picture too small and I can't enlarge it anymore, I also can't revert it to color. With the RAW file, it wouldn't be a problem. It's just one click and it's reset to whatever the camera captured at the time being. Shoot in RAW and save those RAW files is my final tip of the day. Don't be discouraged by the workflow, because you easily get used to it. And actually, It is fun to work on those images and to relive the moments that made you take those pictures. Thanks so much for watching this. If you want to know what's the best budget-friendly lens that gives you professional results, you should watch this video here next. Till the next time, stay safe, stay tuned, and take care. Bye for now.